9:58. That's a big clock.
You want to go with that one? You're welcome. Mine says 10 a.m.
Scott, I just want to check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Right.
So whenever you're ready, Scott, we can start.
Okay. Can someone click close on the meeting being recorded thing? I don't know which screen that is on, but it's not mine. Or got it. Where it says. Okay, let's begin. Valentina, do we need to do anything else? Or are we up and running?
No, all good. You can convene. We're all set. Everything's ready to go. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is the October 2nd meeting of the Connecticut Data Analysis and Technology Advisory Board. This, I believe, is our first meeting of the calendar year, and it's a meeting that we want to use to introduce the timeline and the scope for development of the state data plan, and particularly to get thoughts and ideas from the members of the board as we begin to develop the plan by the end of the year. So I'll go through some of the scope for the plan, the requirements, the timeline. We'll go through a GIS strategic planning effort that has a lot of parallels as part of the meeting. And again, hope to get thoughts and ideas from the members of the board to help guide us in our actions in the next few months. So quickly, I'm going to go through the agenda. We have welcomes and introductions. We had a couple changes in board membership, so I do want to go through and just identify everybody on the board that's attending the meeting today. We'll go through the GIS strategic plan, and then we'll go through the timeline for the next 2-year state data plan for 2025, 2026. If that works, then we'll go through. And then, I put this here, just a reminder for everybody, what's the role for the data board? This is the sort of description in statute for the scope of the board. It's to advise executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government about data policy, to advise OPM about the online repository, that's our state's open data portal, about the development and maintenance of that resource. We can issue reports and recommendations through the board. We can call on agencies to discuss or bring forward something about their work. And then we can use the board to request resources and make recommendations back to legislative leadership. But the primary functions, this first one here, it's really advising all 3 branches of government about data policy, and a lot of that is captured through development of the state data plan that we're beginning now, and we'll talk about the timeline and scope for a little bit later in the meeting. But I wanted to take a minute to go through the board membership because, again, we're losing one member, we're gaining a new member. We've had some changes in the appointments. Oh, and there's a lot more people in the meeting than there were 2 minutes ago, which is great. So wonderful. I'm going to go through and just call the names from the list here that Valentina has wonderfully maintained. And if you could just say hello, the agency or the entity that you're with, and if you want to give anything else about your background, it's just a nice way for people to meet each other. We're in a hybrid setting. It's a little bit weird. So some of us are here in person, some of us are online. But my hope is the next couple meetings, we can bring folks together and you'll get a good working relationship, and we'll use that to develop the plan. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Scott Gall. I'm the Chief Data Officer for State of Connecticut, and I'm the non-voting chair of the board. Here I'm joined by my colleague, Alfredo, who's the Geographic Information Officer. Do you want to say hi, Alfredo?
Hi, I'm Alfredo Herrera. Like Scott said, I'm the Geographic Information Officer for the state of Connecticut, housed at OPM in the Data and Policy Analytics Division.
All right, I'm going to go through the voting members in the order here, and then the ex officio non-voting members. So we've got through Representative Ritter's office, both Thad Dimkowski and Seth Klaskin. Do you guys want to say hi?
Good morning. My name is Thad Dimkowski. As Scott Gall said, I am the representative for Representative Ritter's office. I am the Transportation Supervising Planner at the Department of Transportation in the Enterprise GIS Division of Policy and Planning.
Hi, I'm Seth Klaskin. I'm a civilian appointee of the speakers, and I used to be a state manager at the Secretary of the State's office. In the past, I currently am managing director of specialty outsourced sales, which provides outsourced sales to technology companies. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And then through Senator Looney's office, we have Michelle Reardon-Old, and then we have a new appointee, Adler Coffey. I can introduce him. I don't believe he's in the meeting today, but Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michelle Reardon-Nold, and I'm the director of the Connecticut Data Collaborative.
And then I don't believe he's in the meeting, but we have a new appointment for Adler Coffey, who's the portfolio director at the Connecticut Opportunity Project and the Dalio Education Group, who've done a ton of work on using data to look at the question of the scope of disconnected youth in the state and the issues that population's facing. So Adler has been sort of a wonderful partner to work with in the past few years, and he was appointed to the board in the last couple of weeks, just could not make the meeting, but look forward to having him serve in this role and providing his insights going forward. And then from Rep. Candelaro's office, Bree, I think you're the sole appointee.
Great. I'm Bree Berner. As you said, I'm Representative Vinnie Candelara's appointee, and I do work in that office at the state legislature.
And then from Senator Harding's office, we have two open seats. I do want to thank, he's not in the meeting, but Frank Gentile was the previous appointment from the previous appointing authority. He's the IT manager for City of Danbury, and he had been in the role for a couple of years and did a lot of work to participate in board activities. He provided a lot of insight, particularly about work at the municipal level. So Frank, because of the way the appointments work, is not in the seat anymore, but he was wonderful when he was part of the board, and we're just really have a lot of gratitude for his service here. And again, he couldn't be in the meeting, but we appreciate the time and effort that he devoted to this. All right, I'm going to go through then the non-voting members. That's from Department of Administrative Services, Dave Labadia. I'm going to introduce yourself.
Hi, Scott. It's David Labadia. I'm the Director of Digital Government and Operational Excellence here, working at the Department of Administrative Services under Mark Raymond. Nice to see everybody. Thank you.
And from Freedom of Information Commission, I see Colleen here.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Colleen Murphy here from the Freedom of Information Commission. We are always interested in information policy. Back in the Stone Ages, it was just on paper, but now as we move further and further into this electronic era, of course, we want to keep our finger on the pulse along with the rest of you. And I'm also joined by Attorney Nick Samara from our office, who is much more knowledgeable than I am on electronic information and AI and all of those sorts of things for the future.
Hi, everyone, I'm Nick.
Thank you. And there's still some paper out there, but we're working on it. And next seat's from the Attorney General, Office of the Attorney General, John Newman. See you in the meeting.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Newman from the Attorney General's office. I'm an Assistant Attorney General in the Privacy and Data Security section, and I'm Attorney General Tong's designee for the board.
Excellent. We have a new designee through the Chief Court Administrator, Joe Grealish, who will introduce himself. And before he does so, I will express the gratitude for his service before it or now that it begins.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. My name is Joe Grealish. I'm the Director of Performance Management and Statistics for the branch. And we're really curious to hear what goes on in this committee, because I don't think we've had representation in the past, have we?
Not active. So we're excited that you're here, Joe. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And you're followed by the state librarian, who is in the meeting, I believe.
Good morning, everyone. I am Deborah Chandra, the State Librarian, head of the State Library Agency. And amongst other mandates, we include the Office of the Public Records Administrator and the State Archives, so overseeing the policies about the temporary and permanent retention of records across the state. And we also work with municipalities and others on those efforts as well.
Thank you. And then from the State Treasurer's Office, Christopher.
Morning, Chris Regan. So I am the IT Director for the Office of the State Treasurer on behalf of Treasurer Eric Russell.
Thank you. And we have an open seat, I believe, for Secretary of State's office, unless somebody has been designated in the last few minutes and is in the meeting. And if that is not the case, then our last, but not least, non-voting member is from the State Comptroller's Office. Michelle, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Parlos. I'm the economist at the Office of the State Comptroller, and I'm here on behalf of Comptroller Sean Scanlon.
All right, that's it. Thank you, everyone, for, again, doing the introductions. My hope is in the next couple of months, we can get everybody together and be able to sort of work on developing the state data plan and executing the vision for this board. This is really, I think, the fullest slate that we've had in a few years. And again, a lot of gratitude to everyone's agency for making sure that that we're as close to fully as close to filled out as we've been, and particularly to Valentina, who's done a lot of work to make sure that we've got everybody in place for this. So we're in good position, and thank you, everybody, for making time for today. So again, what you have on the screen, this is the role for the board, just as a refresher. Now we've met all the members. So the remainder of the meeting, we're going to talk about two planning efforts. So we're going to talk about development of the state data plan. We'll hear the timeline. We'll hear some feedback that we've gotten from agencies, from Amy Griffin, a consultant that we've worked with on it. And we're going to introduce that by talking through the GIS strategic plan, which I believe we heard about in the development phase last year, but was wrapped up and finalized this year. And we haven't kind of presented it back to the board, but it's both a plan that everybody should know about because there's some spatial aspect to the work everybody here is doing, but it's also a useful parallel to just understand the planning process and how the GIS strategic plan was developed, because we're going to leverage a lot of those practices for the state data plan for the, again, coming later this year. I'm going to turn over to Alfredo Herrera, the Geographic Information Officer. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Next slide. All right. So a little bit of context in terms of like historical context. So GIS office was created in 2021 and started work in 2022. And one of the mandates that we had from our statutes was the development of a plan for strategic for kind of priorities and developing you know, kind of a way to implement those things. So the horizon is depicted in the statute, says that we have 5 years for every plan, and we have to update it annually, which is a really good kind of way to make sure that we stay nimble in terms of the plan and then revisit it fully every 5 years, which keeps it kind of fresh and up to date. Next slide. So planning in terms of the strategic plans and frameworks and things like that does go back quite a long ways in the state of Connecticut. It goes back as far as the 2005 and efforts in incremental kind of in fits and starts throughout that period up until 2022, 2023, when we started in on the full effort to kind of develop the 5-year plan as denoted in statute. Next slide, please. So the timeline that we kind of went with looks a little bit like this. It really started out with literature review and kind of understanding what other strategic plans look like, what are the kinds of things that are in it. And then we determined that we need to understand what the stakeholders want and what all of the stakeholders want, not just like our most obvious ones. So we developed a surveys and did a series of interviews with key stakeholders and really kind of got a good understanding of what the community was looking for and what those kinds of things. And we did took all of that data and kind of analyzed it, synthesized it, created some kind of pulled out the kind of the key themes and choices that were kind of expressed to us by the community. From there, we did follow-up stakeholder outreach once we did determine those kind of key themes and topics, and then vetted those to make sure that we understood it correctly with the community, which was a really, really enriching process for the plan. Once that was kind of completed, we got our head down and we started writing. You know, it went through many, many iterations, and you know, as that went through, we also developed the mission and vision statements, as well as some of these other the specific goals, which are derived from the themes. Presented it back to our primary constituent community, which is the Connecticut GIS Network, at GIS Day in November of last year. And then it was reviewed and approved by the GIS Advisory Committee back in April of 2024. Next slide, please. This slide also kind of summarizes the process in a slightly more visual sort of way. Like I said, it really started with lit review, and then with parallel paths for both the interviews and the survey information. Obviously, the interviews were much more in depth in the questions that we asked, but they were much more targeted at the audiences that we were kind of seeking those out from. And then from there, developed all of the strategic goals and things like that. Next slide, please. So here's kind of like a quick overview of like the survey respondents and where they are geographically across the state, because, you know, we're GIS people, we do love a map. But, you know, along with that, it kind of, as you see kind of the breakdown of the different sectors that were covered, you know, it's predominantly public sector, but you know, I would say that NGOs and in the private sector are also fairly well covered in terms of their representation. I would love for there to be more the next go around, but you know, what we have, you know, we made sure that their voice was heard, and we did seek them out. Next slide, please. Some of the And here's an example of some of the themes that we kind of pulled out in terms of like data sets for prioritization. So like that kind of helps guide the GIS office and like, okay, what data sets do we really need to kind of go after first, make sure that there's high quality data around it, but also governance and standards and those kinds of things kind of surrounding them as well. Next slide. So this is my last slide here, and it really kind of encapsulates kind of what the plan is in a nutshell. So up at the top, we have the kind of the data, the themes and issues that were identified through the data collection process with the interviews and the survey. So it really talks about, you know, like, people were very interested in coordination and sharing and procurement of authoritative data sets, using data as a service, and, you know, things that are highly reliable and accurate with metadata so that they can rely on that data. They want guidelines and standards and centralization for some of these things so that they can, you know, once again, these are all kind of tied and kind of flow into one each other. And then from there, you know, people were very interested in social equity and access to this data, but then also communication and training, because, you know, just because you have a big pile of data doesn't mean that people actually know what to do with it. So it's really kind of making sure that we communicate it, expose the data, but also communicate the context in which the data lives. From there, we, you know, pass that through the filter of our vision and mission statements for both for the GIS office, and we kind of came up with these 5 goals. The first one is the use of effective governance policies and standards to manage geospatial data. The second one is to implement a sustainable funding model for imagery acquisition, GIS data, and geospatial technologies. The third one is to increase access to data, spatial analysis, web services, and visualization capabilities for local and regional government and other stakeholders. The next one is to provide direct analytical support and enhance capacity building for state agencies. And the last but not least is to broaden communication and engagement across different levels of government and other organizations. So as you can see, like these 5 goals are very kind of interwoven and interlinked, and they kind of build off of each other to really do the things that our stakeholders, both internal, external, and in all across all of the different sectors, kind of told us that they wanted. And this is kind of like our attempt to say, this is what we think we need to do in order to achieve those goals. And so we set those goals for ourselves, and now we've been about the better part of a year into figuring out how we implement this plan and actually bring it into action. Because this thing took a while to develop, and it took us a while to even get started with the development of the plan. Many of these things we were already doing in the GIS office and through the advisory council to make sure that we are already working towards these things. So this, writing it down just kind of draws a line in the sand for us and just reinforces the fact that we are doing what we are meant to be doing, and we have identified the right things to try and move forward with. And that's all I have on this GIS strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Again, I think like Alfred is saying, this is a complete plan. We do plan to update it periodically. It's a good analog for the planning process in general because of the stakeholder outreach, the surveys, the way of the kind of digested and pulled together different insights. So we want people to be thinking about both the process and the actual results. Are there any questions, comments, feedback on the plan before we move to the next items in the agenda? I can't see if there's hands raised. So if you are speaking, you should just unmute yourself. Hearing nothing. Okay. Return. All right. We are going to now talk about development of the 2-year state data plan, and I'll go through what that covers in a second. But for everybody, all the board members in the meeting, this is again really the first meeting of the board in a while. It's the first meeting we've talked about this, but we want to use it as an opportunity to start to get some ideas or thoughts from the board members on the table that can inform the plan. It won't be the last opportunity for engagement, but we'll present some things that we've heard from state agency engagement. We want to start to hear your thoughts and ideas about things that we should be considering for the next 2 years. I'll go over the scope of the plan and the timeline quickly, and then we'll hear from Amy Griffin about what we heard from state agencies. So this is the way the state data plan is described in statute. So we're just going straight to the source. This is what it says. It's created by the chief data officer. That's me, in consultation with agency data officers and executive branch agency heads. And so we've already consulted with both of those groups. We'll go through a little bit about that process in a minute. But we want to go broader than that. We want to make sure we're consulting with a wide range of different stakeholders and hear from you who we should be reaching out to, what groups, constituencies, individuals we might want to touch base with in the development of the plan. Plan has 5 components to it to establish management and data analysis standards for executive branch agencies. We need to set goals that we can meet in the next 2 years related to those standards. Plan can make recommendations to increase standardization integration of systems and practices across agencies. So both of these are really, again, focused on executive branch agencies, developing standards for the use and analysis of data and looking for more increased consistency and standardization across those agencies. If we identify policy concerns that we need to address, then we provide a way to review those, whether they're state or federal policies that inhibit the ability of agencies to kind of share data between themselves, and then explicitly set goals for development of the online repository, which is the open data portal that's established in the same section. So those are the 5 components of the plan. And really the core of it, again, is looking at executive branch agencies and increasing sort of standardization and developing best practices kind of between those agencies. It's a 2-year plan. And so we want to make sure that we develop the plan in a way that it has goals that we can achieve within those 2 years. We could set longer term goals. We could say we want to look at a 5-year or 10-year horizon, but the plan runs on a 2-year cycle. And I'll go through again our timing for that in a second. There's 2 other components in the statutes that I just want to make sure we pull out that folks know about. The plan provides a process for reporting to the chief data officer about agency progress, achieving the goals in the plan. So that's also part of what we've done through the engagement with agency leadership and agency data officers. So we've got a good set of examples where agencies have seen progress, had good results in the past couple of years. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. And then we want to make sure that there's consistency between the state data plan and our technology efforts at a state as a state. And so there's language in the statutes that ensures that we are aligned for our IT activities and the development of the state data plan. And that's something that I think is much easier now with the work the state's done to centralize the IT resources. And Dave, who's in the meeting from Department of Administrative Services, has been a wonderful partner throughout this process. And so that's the scope of the plan. Again, it's 2 years. And so we're kicking off this process now. So we've started some of this work already. This is the first engagement with the board, but we've been putting some pieces in place to allow us to get the plan done by the end of the year in parallel. This is a rough timeline for development of the plan by the end of the calendar year. So kind of working backwards, our deadline is December 31st, 2024. That's when the plan has to be finalized. So I will submit it to this board in advance of that deadline. I don't plan to do it on the 31st, but that's our timeline, is to get the plan submitted by the end of the calendar year. The sort of milestone prior to that is by November 1st, I have to submit a draft plan to this board, and then the board holds a public hearing on the draft plan, recommends revisions to the draft based on the outcomes of that public hearing. So that the board members, you should already have these meetings scheduled. We have the public hearing scheduled early in November, so that there's time to get a draft in, a little time to review it, time for people to react. So there's a meeting scheduled in early November for the public hearing, and then another meeting in December where we're hoping to be able to have the final plan submitted and adopted. So you should, if you're one of the board members, you should have those meetings already calendared, and we've got that laid out. But those are sort of the 2 milestones here that are in statute. Is the draft comes in November 1st. There's 3 milestones. Draft comes in November 1st. There's a public hearing after it, a process of revising and making adjustments to the plan, and then the final plan submitted by the end of the calendar year. So what we've done to date, going backwards, is we've reached out to agency leadership. We've reached out to agency data officers. Every executive branch agency designates an agency data officer as the sort of point person for their data related activities. And so we've engaged both of those groups, gone through sort of the same process about talking about the scope of the plan, what's been done in the past 2 years, what folks would like to see in the next 2 years. And in a minute, we'll switch to Amy, and she'll talk about what we've heard from agency leadership in that process. But again, we don't want to limit it to just those 2 constituencies. We want to make sure that we're reaching out to a wider range of folks, again, as we saw in the development of the GIS plan. And so I will flip to, this is a refresher, sorry, quickly, in case you don't have it committed to memory. Our current state data plan, which we are wrapping up the implementation of, has 3 sort of pillars: improving access to data, supporting the development of capacity for the agencies who are doing this work, and then using data for decision making. Those are sort of the 3 pillars that we focused on. We have goals and metrics kind of in the plan that are laid out in a little more detail in the full document, but this is a quick summary of those, and we'll report out on those as we kind of get back to the conclusion of this plan. But this is what's in our current plan, is focusing on these 3 things: improving access to data, building agency capacity, and being able to use data for decision making. And so one of the questions I think for the board is the extent to which we maintain continuity with those pillars, or if we focus on different topics kind of going forward, if we want to make adjustments to this. Now is the time to do so. Any just quick questions on the scope of the plan, the timeline, the metrics, before I switch the floor and the microphone to Amy, who will go through what we heard from engaging agency leadership? And again, I can't really see hands, so if you have something to add, just
Scott, Thad Dymkowski speaking. Just wanted to ask real quickly, the results of both the survey to the ADOs, the survey to agency leadership. I'm sure Amy will cover a little bit today. Is that data available to members of the board?
It will be available. Excellent question. So we're going to give a high level review of it today, and then there's a report that'll come out in the next hopefully few weeks, and then we'll submit the report to the board members, and I think as part of the planning material, so that we just don't have it all pulled together today, but we'll give a quick overview of it, and then you should get a fuller report soon.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Any other process questions before we go into what we heard? Right, hearing nothing. Amy, I'm going to yield the microphone. I will a quick introduction. So we had a discussion both with agency data officers and then a couple of weeks ago, I think, with agency leadership about understanding their priorities, what they want to see happen in the next 2 years related to the scope of the state data plan. So we had a great discussion with the agency leadership. Amy Griffin, who will introduce herself momentarily, facilitated and led that discussion, and we'll go through the results of it in a second. And we had, again, a similar discussion with agency data officers, and I can provide any insights from that. Again, I think we're hearing kind of the same things directionally from both groups, and we want to play that back for you so you know what agencies want to see. Amy, do you want to, I can click if you want to sort of take the microphone over.
Okay, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. So thank you. My name is Amy Griffin. Yes, I was a consultant facilitator. I'm also an evaluator, so I'm a fellow data person, and I'm the founder of Nimble Consulting LLC. So as Scott mentioned, we held a meeting September 18th with agency leaders. Before that, we did ask them to complete a survey, because we wanted them to think critically before the meeting about the ways in which they're using data, any challenges, and also then to provide the themes from that survey to be able to facilitate a discussion across agencies. So we're going to go over some of that, and then I'll give you a few impressions of the meeting, but as was just mentioned, we're going to be finalizing a report in the next few weeks that will summarize not only the survey results, but the themes and priorities and recommendations from that. Next. So we were really pleased that 22 agencies responded to the survey. Again, we asked them about their data use, their successes, their challenges, and what they foresee as a priority in the next 2 years. So some of these were open-ended responses, and some of these were Likert scales to the extent to which they agree or disagree with the statement. So in general, most respondents thought that their agency effectively uses data to achieve their goals. Next. When we asked them about successes related to building staff capacity to use data, many, these were open-ended, so these are themes from the open-ended comments. Many leaders talked about their success hiring qualified staff into key roles. However, some did mention challenges finding candidates to fill data positions. And there was actually a very robust conversation about that. I'll allude to that a little bit later. Some talked about developing the skills of their junior staff. Others were aware of resources that they were able to tap into to grow their area. A few mentioned the fellows, I believe that's through the governor's office, to increase support. And some mentioned investing in specific TA trainings or actual software, like GIS or R to analyze data. Some of them are looking at, how to tell our story with data, learning more about evaluation, automated reporting. So there were a lot of really nice successes that folks mentioned. Next. And then we also asked them, what successes have you had improving your access to data? And many talked about keying into how they can improve their operations and efficiencies. So a lot of this had to do with, looking at what kind of call wait times do we have? How are we responding to data? How are we presenting real-time data to the public? So they had some very specific kind of quality checks that they were doing to improve and understand access to data. with regard to wait times, one person talked about their agency looking at just the simple influx of calls and recognizing that they needed more staffing on certain days and times than they did others, you know, very simple kinds of changes to improve their operations. A lot of people talked about, you know, improving their ability to share data and transparency, not only to the public, but also within their own organizations. Thinking about how they can improve their reporting tools to monitor what's happening within their programs, and then also improving access and communication internally about data and use to help with staff communication. Next. So we also asked, what successes have you had using data to make decisions? So many people are looking at performance measures. They're looking at where are we where we thought we would be with regard to our efforts. Some talked about looking at outcome data and descriptively looking at, you know, things like their outreach, their service, as well as gaps in underserved communities that they hope to be able to reach. As I mentioned before, many are talking about doing these quality improvement checks to look at things like response time and improve their efficiencies. And at least one organization talked about having new legislation to be able to collect necessary information about an aspect of their population to help improve their decision-making for that particular group. Next. So we had a really nice discussion about their successes. I felt like the group as a whole was incredibly receptive to sharing and expanding on some of the things that they talked about in the survey. And it really felt like there was a lot of learning happening in the room when people were talking about their successes, especially related to being able to get appropriate staffing and tools. So one of the things that I felt that there was differing levels of awareness about what tools and resources folks have access to across agencies. So it seems like there's a wonderful opportunity to provide some additional education to the state leaders so they're aware of what resources they have, especially related to tools and hiring. But now we'll talk about some of their challenges. Next. So again, as Scott mentioned, you'll receive the full survey data, but for the to facilitate the conversation, we presented them with the top 5 challenges that were stated in the survey. And I guess probably no surprise, budget was the first challenge in terms of being able to use data. They also talked about data availability, quality, their staff skill set, and then recruiting qualified staff. So again, part of the discussion about this challenge is some agencies just had better successes than others with regard to identifying training opportunities and identifying qualified staff. There was a robust discussion about the fellows program, as well as working with others that are, you know, like a doctoral level, and how some agencies are successfully onboarding you know, people that have this kind of skill set. And so I'm hoping that that momentum is going to help offset some of these challenges. And I know that we've already talked about ways to just ensure that people know that, you know, some of these resources exist. Next. Oh, Seth, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I apologize for my ignorance on this, but I just wanted to know, does the state itself offer, does DAS offer, for example, any trainings for agency staff that are already on staff to help them in the area of data acquisition, planning, maintenance, use, strategy, anything like that? Because it seems like some of the survey answers, the responses seem to indicate that these are areas of challenge. You know, you can develop your own staff that you already have on staff instead of recruiting. Sometimes that's helpful because they already understand what kind of data would be useful. They just need the capacity to be able to access it.
Exactly. It seemed to be a lack of awareness of what kinds of trainings are provided. Scott, do you want to respond to the resources that currently exist?
Yeah, I think what we're hearing there are resources that currently exist. So I think that's your question. There's training through DAS does sort of enterprise training offerings for the state. So we've got access to some of that. We've had some tailored trainings that we developed through our office that were focused initially on ARPA recipients. We've had GIS training, open data training. And so we've got, there's some resources out there. What I think you hear from the surveys, there's demand for more. People would like, more different types of training on different topics. They want to go, it's reaching a wider audience. And so there's definitely interest in going beyond what we have. One of the things I think we'll do in the next couple of months is try and pull together a little more of an overview of the resources that are out there. Because I think we learned also that there's some low-hanging fruit to just make sure agency employees are aware of the resources that are out there and that they can access those. And that's an easy problem to solve, but we'll, I think, present some of that back to the board soon, because there's some resources that are there, but there's definitely appetite and demand for more than kind of what's currently on offer. And we want to point people to the right options. We've done some internally. We point people to external training resources as well and say this is something that we know other agencies have used and has worked well. So it's kind of a mix, but there's a theme, I think, where you're seeing more interest in it.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you both. Yes, and then there was also a discussion after the meeting about what could be done to assist with onboarding of leaders to ensure that they know about these things and where they're housed for easy access. Next slide, please. Okay, so anticipated data-related impacts. Next. Thank you. So we wanted to know, what do leaders anticipate to be, the greatest impacts on their work in the next couple of years? And artificial intelligence was there at the very top. Thinking about IT optimization, always pursuing ways of ensuring data security and privacy, and then also staff turnover in combination with that. So there were lots of ways in which people were actually talking about ways of trying to use AI to improve workflow, and then also thinking about how to improve their understanding of AI and really not only, how it can improve work and how to think about it as it emerges as a bigger part of our everyday work. Next. So we also asked them about their training capacity, building needs with regard to data use. So next, please. So the top, I was quite surprised about this in a very pleasant way. The top ways that they would like to receive additional training is through data storytelling, visualization. So they really want to be able to cull through the information they have and really be able to find the story to tell. They were mostly at the leadership level. They were talking about, how do we tell our story to the public? We have all of this information. What do we want to tell? How do we tell it? They want to learn more about data governance and privacy and management. And so again, in speaking with Scott and his staff after the meeting, there are some existing resources, but how do we make that more aware of these trainings? How do we build it up? And then how do we present it in a way that is easy for people to access and use? Next, is there another slide? Oh, okay. So I think that, is this for our discussion, Scott, to open it up for questions?
Yeah, I think we put a couple, or I put a couple, three, not a couple, kind of discussion prompts here. I want to see if there's other questions just sort of generally on the content, the reactions, and the survey. And again, we had a survey that was administered to both agencies, their leadership, the agency data officers, and then discussions with both groups. There are not huge differences, I think, in the responses from the agency leadership and the agency data officers, and the discussion. The same themes that you see in the survey responses are largely reflected in the discussions that we had, and we'll get a report about that discussion back out to this group in the next few weeks. But it lets know if there's questions on any of the content from the slides, anything that you wanted to go through, or just understand something in a little more detail. And then we had these factors here as prompts for discussion here, because we want to hear from the board and the members of the board what you want to make sure that the state's focusing on as we develop the plan in the next couple of months, what things you think are going to influence the way in which people use or access state data in the next couple of years, things that are barriers to use and access that we should look at addressing, and then in kind of the process area, we want to look at different types of stakeholders that we need to reach out to in the next 2 months. Again, we've done sort of the work to consult with the agency leadership, the agency data officers. We'll do a deeper consultation with agency staff to reach a wider range of folks starting this week. And then we're going to do some of the external outreach in the next few weeks, including we have the conference with Connecticut Data Collaborative. We're going to try and use that as an opportunity to reach the very wide audience that they touch. But we want to make sure that we're engaging with the board to understand if there's things that you think are going to influence use of data in the next couple of years, barriers that you think we need to be paying attention to, as stakeholders we need to reach out to. Again, roughly 1 month from now, I'll be sending you a draft of the state data plan. That is the first sort of milestone in this process. So in the next month, we want to make sure we're gathering a lot of input and ideas from folks, and that informs the development of that first draft. So anything that questions on the content or the themes that Amy described, or things that you want us to factor in for the development of the plan, and really coming up with this first draft in the next 4 weeks.
Hey, Scott, I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I see other people with their hand raised. So I would like to ask a question in my turn.
Oh, I can't see the hands raised either. I can stop. Oh, I'm going to keep the screen sharing up.
It looks like Seth might have it be in front of me.
Sorry, Seth, if you have a hand. Okay, you've got a hand.
Yeah,
Seth,
thank you. Thank you. I just, and to raise your hand, you go to reactions at the bottom of the screen, and you can raise your hand and lower your hand there. But just to continue on the theme that that I touched on earlier, it seems like a common theme from the discussions with the agencies is the need for maybe even an institution approach or an institute approach for teaching data access and use, and maybe like it makes sense to include in the state data plan going forward something about funding for a concentrated educational program for agency data officers themselves. There may be data officers who were dubbed that given that position and don't even really feel comfortable with it, but the agency had to name someone, so they did. And also unit and division level managers, so that they can get in on the game of identifying data sets and making them available, and then also using them for their own decision making. So I think that might be helpful. And that's also, I think, an area ripe with low-hanging fruit, like you said, Scott, where the agencies could pick up a lot of data use quickly and get on board quickly if they're given maybe some lessons, not only in Hartford, but maybe regionally around the state, wherever agencies are found. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. And I've mastered the hand raising, and so I now see John and David in the queue.
Right. Thanks, Scott. The capturing of all the information from agencies and top concerns is a phenomenal point to do. I'm curious if the job titles and the job specs and descriptions have been captured, because obviously different agencies, different sizes, different roles are going to capture that. And I'll just make a mention of, so in my role at the AG's office, we're on the affirmative side, and we do a lot of data security cases, and states are moving towards getting technologists, which is the wonderful amalgam of technology, policy, problem solving, which we're all doing and all learning in this role with data. So often I think agencies may be using different titles or kind of bridging the gap through certain job descriptions, or as Seth just pointed out, it was the person that happened to be there that day and they got designated. So to the extent that one of the items might be, in addition to the training, education opportunities, which are all wonderful, taking a look at job descriptions and titles.
Yeah, thank you. I think when we're giving sort of the high level overview, but when we get the more detailed one, I think you'll see a lot of that reflected in the questions. There's real a need to kind of focus on the job classes and making sure that they're up to date. Right, David.
Hey, Scott, thanks. Yeah, this was great. I think one of the observations I had when looking at the opportunity assessment was, I think it's pretty common that the end users will want improved data visualization and analytics. But I just want to make sure we're being considerate of the fact that oftentimes the data sources themselves aren't necessarily accurate, available, stable. And so you look at the sort of train of work, and just as long as we're being considerate around training and specialization in data, it really has to back up to those data engineers, the data modelers, like making sure the data is available and accurate, and then the data science and analysts can then take that and wrangle it in a way that the visualizations become both accurate and meaningful. So I didn't see that necessarily called out. To your point, it's a broader need, but I just, you're going to have to, you have a tip of an iceberg need, and sometimes you just might have to swim a little bit deeper to solve for it. And so I just want to just raise that for the group.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a good call out for a couple of reasons. One, that is one thing I think you would see a little more from the agency data officer feedback, because it's just a group that's a little more hands-on. And what Amy's going through is from the agency leadership, and they're, they want these things, but they're not necessarily going to be hands-on doing it. We did see some focus on that. And it's also a good area where there's some low-hanging fruit. We have, and Pauline Zaldonis is the person who did this, who cannot be here today, unfortunately, but I know has presented to the board in the past. She worked to develop visualization guidance and accessibility guidance for state agencies to be able to use, so that we're creating data visualizations that are both accessible and clear about the limitations in the data. And so that's the kind of thing that it's out there, but the awareness probably is a little lower than it could be. So we're going to make sure that we've got some of the things that are already there, we raise awareness for, and if there's a gap, that we focus on kind of addressing that gap. But I think that's yeah, that's consistent, hopefully, with other feedback. Alfredo, you have a hand raised and you're right next to me. Okay.
I do indeed, a literal hand. One thing I want to piggyback off of a comment that David made was the importance of persistence and the availability of data, especially as people try to use this data programmatically. Persistence of data available across various platforms becomes really, really important, and helps to engender a lot of trust in the data. Because it just takes once for a data set to go missing for people to lose trust in it and never really go back to it. It's kind of unfortunate that it's that sensitive, but it really is that sensitive. So I just wanted to highlight that kind of brief comment that David made on that point.
Thanks. And I see Seth has a hand up.
Yeah, hi. Another point. Well, first of all, I don't want to go past this section of the meeting without thanking the folks who did the survey. Looks like it was a good survey. When we get the survey data, as board members, it'll be interesting to see how many and what types of agencies responded. There used to be something around 60 agencies. I think that they got compacted a little bit, but if there's only 5 agencies that responded to this, that would be telling as well. But if there are 40 who responded, then that would also be important to know, and that would be excellent. But one other thing that another thought that I had is that, just like we talked in the past about standardizing memoranda of understanding for data sharing across agencies, I think maybe it could be helpful to standardize data set management, so that agencies who are fledgling in their data involvement can have a standardized, formatted, almost formula or form that they can follow. Like, here are the data sets that we are prioritizing. Here are the data sets that we're maintaining, and then, constantly add, and it becomes over time a full library for that agency. And I think, you know, starting out can
Hey,
be
Kelly.
intimidating to agencies, but if they have some of these tools at their disposal, it could make it easier and more likely that they would get on board.
Thank you. And I saw Thad went off mute. Michelle had a question here that because she's raising her actual hand, I didn't see. And then just one thing quickly, Seth, on the number of agencies. This is an unexpectedly thorny to me question to understand exactly how many agencies there are. There's about 25 to 30, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, that have designated an agency data officer. And that's the group that we reached out to for this, because I think that's the scope, which I know even does not include a couple of the folks that are on the board today. So that's an excellent question that I would be very happy to have a separate digression about. But Michelle has thought.
Thanks, Scott. Just to follow up a little bit on what Seth said, yeah, I feel like we've reached a little bit of maturation in terms of the open data portal and where we're at. And I wonder if it's now time to think about, do agencies have a learning agenda? And that can also help then drive what data are important to make available to the public, and also a focus on standardization, right? Because when you start to dig into those data sets, you see the issues that they have, and it could help drive, you know, like I said, standardization and or what kind of measurement do we need to be capturing? Like, do we even have the data to answer the questions that we want to answer? So I wonder, just thinking about that in terms of also our plan development, maybe that's like a next step, since we have been, you know, we have this open data portal for several years now. Have we reached sort of a plateau where it's time to go to the next level? And then just a little bit of a shameless plug, you know, we do a lot of data literacy training at the Connecticut Data Collaborative. So I, you know, encourage agencies to reach out to us. You know, we know it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel when we already have, you know, programs that agency staff might find useful. And we have done many trainings for state agencies. So currently working with the Department of Developmental Services right now. So that's a little shameless plug. But
There's no shame in it. We actively refer people to the Data Collaborative. It's a wonderful resource. Maybe two quick things on it, and then I see Thad, and then Seth has applause, not a hand raised. But the for the learning agendas, this is a good thing. We can sort of, it's good to hear the feedback. We can present some of this sort of back to the board subsequent meetings. So we've done some work to develop learning agendas. We did it for the state longitudinal data system, which is 15 agencies. We don't have it at an agency level. But one of the unsolved problems that, again, Pauline, who's not here, had taken a look at is we have a requirement for agencies to develop open data access plans, which is sort of lives as more of a compliance requirement now. And we're trying to think of ways we can make that more active. And I could definitely see trying to have the learning agendas line up with the data that's published through the open data portal. We're doing a little bit of work now to try and tune the data that we're publishing there. But I think that's a sort of a good way to think about it, is like really the data is there to answer questions that either your agency has or that you're hearing from external stakeholders. And so we've done a little bit to move that forward, but that could be sort of more fully actualized. Thad, you have a hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Scott. So a lot of what I'm hearing and a lot of what I'm seeing on the screen revolves around what we all know as data governance. And in polling these organizations and talking with the ADOs and things like that, I was curious how many of these organizations have and maintain active data governance plans, and if there's any bearing that has on maybe some of the responses, and how we could tie that into the discussions that we're having and the plans that we're making as well.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, because that's the other area in which, or one of the other couple of areas in which I think there's a little bit of daylight between the themes from the agency leadership and the agency data officers. From the agency data officers, there was really a focus on data governance as a topic that they wanted to dig into. It's definitely not the case that every agency has sort of an internal data governance plan and the committees and sort of the other elements that you would have of that. But there are a few agencies that have dug deeper into that, have sort of more fully fleshed out policies. And so we wanted to kind of understand and highlight that. But that's an area where I think you saw a lot more interest from the agency data officers, again, just sort of more directly relevant to their day-to-day work. But that and I think is an important theme for us to pick up in the next 2 years too. I don't see any other hands raised, but I did want to go back and ask for just a quick last round to see if we can get feedback on the first and the third questions on here. Are there other factors? So we asked about factors in the survey. I'll pull that up in a second. Other factors that people think are going to influence use of state data in the next couple of years. Actually, I'll click to a slide in a second with that. So other things that you want us to have on our radar. That's where, again, the board, I think, has a really important role to make sure that we are not, we don't have blind spots, that we're hearing from people with expertise in this area who come from have a different, fresh perspective on things. So is there something that we should be thinking about or focusing on for the next 2 years or longer? Do we want to incorporate that wasn't in the last plan? And then
Yes, Scott, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
Just to answer that directly, I think we need to maybe concern ourselves with the advent of artificial intelligence, and particularly with false artificial intelligence, and trying to bolster the agencies against fake data getting out, or some kind of an attack on an agency based on an AI bot that is portraying them inappropriately or something like that. So, there may need to be some training or something in that regard.
Yeah, thank you. And let me, I'll introduce the slide here. So this is a chart version of similar to what Amy presented. This is from the agency data officers, not the leadership. But this is the different, we asked about these 7 topics if the agencies thought they would have an impact in the next 2 years. And you can see both AI, privacy, and security are the top 3. We asked about the changes in federal race ethnicity standards, the IT optimization from the state, whether staff turnover or retirements are going to be an issue, other changes in state or federal law. So these are the topics we asked about, and you can see the ranking from the agency data officers, and it's not that different from the agency leadership. But again, there could be something that you're thinking about or that you see that we should be on top of in the next 2 years. We just want to make sure we're covering that. And then the other thing, just to go back to, if there's any specific stakeholders, we're going to start sort of a more focused external stakeholder outreach in the next couple of weeks. Again, really building on what had been done for the GIS plan. So we've talked to the agencies. We're going to start talking to other external groups. If there's somebody that you think we should be reaching out to, consulting with, whether it's for an interview, focus group, survey, say now, you're welcome to email or contact me after, or just let us know in the meeting. But that's where we want to make sure we're getting input before the draft comes in the next month. So ideas on that front would be welcome. And I see Thad and David have hands up.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, Seth, I want to thank you for bringing up artificial intelligence. I was kind of waiting to see if it would appear in today's conversation, and I think I would have been shocked if it hadn't. But I guess part of my challenge is, and Scott, Seth, I completely understand your concern, and I agree with you on it. I think one of my concerns, though, is the perception of AI. Most people, I feel, don't have really a full understanding of AI and all that's involved in it. Those of us who've been working in the industry and have kind of seen this grow, know that it's kind of like an onion. Every time we think we've peeled down to what we think is the center, we find out that there was so much more yet to be discovered about AI and its capabilities and how it's growing and how we're fostering this technology. But I think that's part of my concern is getting some education and information out to folks about AI, about how the state is using AI. Now, I know that there is a committee that is being formed and has been formed with regards to looking at AI and how it's being used in the state, formulating some regulations and some policy on it. So I'm glad to hear that. But I agree. I think this AI is definitely something that we should, as a board, focus on to some extent. Utilizing the resources of this AI committee at the state level, but also looking at an opportunity to educate and inform folks about AI and all that's involved, because it's so much more than just ChatGPT and what people see in the press and on their cell phones and technology.
All right, thank you, Thad. And David, hand raised.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I think there's one sort of larger topic that could make this list, and it's around the introduction of digital identity in the state. There's an expectation from I think our residents as well as several agencies to both create a digital identity and leverage that across state systems. And that's going to present a slew of challenges around trust around identity management, identity proofing, the creation of the digital identity, and then the actual expectation, I think, that's going to grow out of that existing sort of a chicken and the egg, where more systems are going to need to leverage, the concept that a constituent would say, well, you know who I am. I just went through all the systems to prove that to you. Now give me all the benefits of doing that. And so I think digital identity, specific to DMV around driver's licenses is on the horizon. But then once that exists, I think there's going to be a external expectation on, I want to use that everywhere. So that has its own data challenges as well, as far as building a community of trust and leverage.
Yeah, and thank you, Dave, for bringing that up. That is a clear thing that's missing on here, should be on it. And we've heard, I think, both loud and clear from agency leadership. It comes up in the discussions, and you'd see it through the agency data officers. And there's a push and pull, and I don't know if John has thoughts on this, but there's really, people want this, but then at the same time, once you start having this kind of information shared across a wide range of agencies, it raises the privacy and security concerns that are sort of, second and third on our list here. But I think that's, this is definitely, that's a topic to put on the list. Someone else had a hand raised that is now down, and if I...
Hi, Scott. No, it was I who had the hand raised, and you kind of brought it up as I was waiting. The idea of security, right? And David brings up a valid topic about the creation of this identity and the information that's going to be attached to it, and just the use of this information. And I think personal privacy and security is going to be hand in hand with that. I think that's definitely something that's going to definitely become more and more of a concern for folks. We're seeing occasional headlines about the talk about, real ID and the use of, whether you're traveling, going to the airport, doing these things, and how this higher security of identification is becoming more and more prevalent in what we do in our day-to-days, and the digital lifestyle that people are living online. It's becoming more and more concerned about personal privacy and identification and such things. So I think it's definitely a valid topic for this board to consider.
All right, thank you. Any other thoughts?
Can I just add, I'm sorry, I just want to add a little caveat to my concern about AI. I'm an advocate of AI in the IT world. I'm not saying that AI is a bad thing, and I just want to respond because I picked up on Thad's concern for what I said earlier. AI can be a very positive thing, and I think agencies should be taught how they can use it to their advantage. At the same time, I think it could be one of the barriers to agencies, or it can actually serve as an incentive for agencies to get on board with the data train, because by having your data organized and ready to go, it can help an agency to refute any attack, a collateral attack by an AI generated criticism of their agency. So by having good positive data that may even be AI generated to help defend against any attacks like that could be incentive for agencies to become more active in their data assembly.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I think there's sort of like the push and pull in this area too. There's potential for great benefits, but there's risks. We did issue what you're reminding me, we did issue the responsible AI framework for the state earlier this year. And I don't remember, we talked about the development of it with the board. I don't know if we sort of wrapped up the final version of that with the board, but we issued a responsible AI framework. I know judicial branch has a similar framework that went out recently, and like had come up earlier, we're developing an advisory group to provide the same thing that had come up earlier about governance for this, to make sure that that we understand the ways in which it's being used, both the benefits and the risks, and that's hopefully captured through that governance process where we're bringing together different perspectives, making sure there's a thoughtful way in which we're implementing AI within the state, so we don't go off the rails. So that, I think, unless there's any other questions or comments or feedback on this, please, if you have thoughts on stakeholder outreach, please do reach out separately at some point in the next few weeks. Don't wait too long, because again, I have to get a draft of this plan to the board by November 1st. I think it'll be a couple days before that to meet the timeline for the public hearing. There'll be a public hearing early in November, and then again, the December meeting to hopefully wrap up the planning process. But we want to make sure that we're hearing from a wide range of constituencies before we put pen to paper. So if there's somebody you think we should be reaching out to, don't hesitate to identify that group. I will stop screen sharing, and then unless there's any other item or business for today, thank everybody for the attendance. I want to again thank Frank Gentile for his service on the board. Thank Joe for and the judicial branch for making the commitment, and welcome Adler to the board, hopefully at the next meeting. So thank you everybody for making the time for this today, and we will conclude today's meeting. Thanks.
Thanks.